Section 1. You're standing in your kitchen late at night, the overhead light buzzing softly, phone in your hand. A message from a family group chat just came in. It's not even that long, but somehow it lands heavy. Your shoulders tighten, your stomach drops, and before you type a single word back, you already feel irritated, guilty, and tired all at once. You haven't replied yet, but your body is already reacting. Here's the question most people never stop to ask. What if the real problem isn't your family's opinions, but the way those opinions still get immediate access to your emotions? What if the drama keeps repeating not because you're weak, but because the pattern is old and automatic? The pain shows up in subtle, exhausting ways. You feel torn between wanting to be loyal and wanting to be free. You replay conversations in your head while trying to work, drive, or fall asleep. A single comment about your career, your relationship, your money, or your lifestyle can knock you off balance for hours. You hesitate to make clear decisions because you can already hear the criticism before you even act. And if nothing changes, the cost keeps stacking up: lost focus, strained relationships, restless nights, and the slow erosion of self-respect that comes from living your adult life under constant emotional pressure. Today isn't about blaming your family. It's about reclaiming control. By the end of this lesson, you'll know how to pause instead of reacting when family pushes your oldest buttons. You'll learn how to respond without defending, explaining, or escalating. And you'll walk away with practical tools to protect your attention, your energy, and your values, even in situations where you used to feel powerless. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's be honest about why this matters so much. Family opinions don't just sting because they're critical. They sting because they're tied to identity. These are the people who knew you before you knew yourself. The roles you played around them were formed early, reinforced often, and rarely questioned. Even when you've built an adult life, those old roles can snap back into place in seconds. Suddenly, you're not responding as the person you are now. You're reacting as the person you used to be. That's why advice like "just don't care what they think" feels insulting when you're in the middle of it. You're not dealing with a simple mindset issue. You're dealing with conditioned emotional responses that live in your body, not just your thoughts. As Marcus Aurelius notes in Meditations 5.20, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, but with family, that imagination has decades of practice. The stakes are higher than most people admit. When family pressure runs through your reactions, it bleeds into everything else. You second-guess career moves. You stay in relationships longer than you should. You avoid honest conversations because you're tired of the fallout. Over time, you start organizing your life around what will cause the least friction instead of what actually fits you. That's how resentment quietly builds, even in families that love each other. This lesson isn't about cutting people off or becoming cold. It's about learning how to stay grounded when familiar triggers appear. It's about responding from your values instead of your reflexes. It's about choosing your own life without turning every interaction into a battle. Here's the shift we're aiming for. Reacting is fast, emotional, and automatic. It feels urgent. Responding is slower, intentional, and grounded. It feels calm, even when the situation isn't. When you respond, you don't need to win, explain, or convince. You only need to stay aligned with yourself. As we move forward, I want you to keep one small thing in mind. Think of a recent family interaction that lingered longer than it should have. Not the biggest argument of your life. Just a comment, a question, or a tone that stayed with you. Notice where you felt it in your body. Tight chest. Shallow breath. Jaw clenched. That physical reaction is where the real work begins. First, we're going to break down why family dynamics bypass logic so easily and pull you into reactions you don't like. Next, you'll learn how to slow things down by refusing to respond on emotional autopilot, even when pressure is high. Then, we'll tackle overexplaining, one of the most common ways adults accidentally give away their authority. After that, we'll work on how to end conversations internally, so they don't keep replaying in your head and stealing your evening. Finally, we'll put all of this into a realistic situation where the old pattern almost takes over, but doesn't. This isn't about becoming perfect or unbothered. You're still human. You'll still feel things. The difference is that feelings won't be driving the wheel anymore. You'll be choosing your responses instead of bracing for impact. Take a quiet breath right now. Just one slow inhale and a longer exhale. Notice how even that small pause creates a little space. That space is where choice lives. And once you learn how to protect it, family drama stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you can move through without losing yourself. In a bit, we'll walk through a Friday night moment where a familiar family message arrives at the worst possible time, and you'll see exactly how these ideas prevent a spiral that used to ruin your whole night. Section 2. The first change that actually loosens family drama is this: you stop responding immediately. Not after you've already typed a defensive paragraph. Not after you've already argued in your head for 20 minutes. You stop at the first moment you feel that internal surge to reply. Because the surge is the signal. The surge is the old pattern waking up. And the stakes are simple. If you keep answering from urgency, you keep letting other people's emotions set your pace, your tone, and sometimes your entire mood for the day. If nothing changes, you stay trapped in a loop that looks like being a good son or daughter, but feels like being on call. A message comes in, you respond fast to reduce tension, and for a short moment you feel relief. Then the next message arrives, or the conversation reopens, or you start replaying it in your mind. You lose focus at work. You snap at your partner or your kids because you're carrying leftover irritation. You lie in bed and keep thinking of better things you should have said. And after a while, the cost isn't just emotional. It's time, sleep, attention, and self-respect. You're living your adult life, but you're still being pulled around by the same invisible strings. This works because emotions are fast and the body is loyal to what it learned early. When family pushes a familiar button, your nervous system reacts before your thinking brain has time to choose. Your chest tightens. Your jaw clenches. Your breathing gets shallow. You feel an almost physical urgency to fix it, to defend yourself, to explain, to make them understand. At that moment, your body is treating the situation like a threat, even if the words on the screen are technically polite. That's why your reasonable response often comes out sharp, overly detailed, or emotionally loaded. Slowing down isn't a communication trick. It's a state change. You're giving your body time to come back down so your mind can lead again. This is how a calmer, more focused version of you responds instead of reacting. Here's the identity line to hold onto: the adult version of you does not need to prove your adulthood in real time. Pausing isn't disrespectful. It's self-leadership. It tells your own nervous system, I don't make decisions while I'm braced for impact. And it quietly tells everyone else, you don't get instant access to me just because you're family. The microscript has to be plain enough to use when you're activated. Say it word for word, I'll think about this and get back to you. If you want a slightly firmer version for repeated pressure, you can use, I'm not ready to respond right now. I'll get back to you. Either way, the goal is the same. You're buying time without opening a debate. You're not apologizing for having a nervous system. You're not explaining why you need space. You're simply taking it. Now let's put this into a real North American scene so it doesn't stay abstract. It's Wednesday afternoon. You're at work. Slack is buzzing. You've got a meeting in 40 minutes, and you're trying to finish something before you get pulled into another call. Your phone lights up with a text from a parent. So what's the plan? Are you going to do what we talked about or not? It's followed by a second message with a suggestion you've already said no to. Your body responds instantly. You feel the heat in your face. You think, I've explained this 100 times. You start crafting a response in your head while your eyes keep scanning your laptop screen, except you're not really reading anything anymore. The old reaction is fast. You type a long message that tries to cover every angle. You justify your choices. You remind them of your responsibilities. You try to sound respectful while also trying to be heard. And because you're writing from tension, the message comes out slightly sharp or slightly defensive, even if you don't intend it. Then you send it, and now you're stuck. You keep checking your phone for the reply. You lose momentum at work. Your mood shifts. Even if the conversation ends, the emotional residue stays. Here's the new response. You notice the urge. Not the message, the urge. You feel your chest tighten and your fingers want to move fast. You stop. You send the microscript, "I'll think about this and get back to you." Then you do something physical to seal the pause. You put the phone face down. You slide it into a drawer. You step away to refill your water. The point is to create a small break between stimulus and response. And here's what usually happens next: nothing explodes. The world doesn't collapse because you didn't respond immediately. You go back to your work and you finish the thing you were doing. Later that night, after dinner, when your nervous system is calmer, you look at the message again. It lands differently. You might respond with one short sentence. You might choose to repeat your boundary. Or you might realize the message doesn't require a response at all, only a decision you make privately. This is where people get tangled. You might think pausing will make things worse. You might fear they'll say, "Why are you ignoring me?" Or you might worry that you're being disrespectful. But timing is part of maturity. You already accept delayed responses from coworkers, doctors, landlords, friends, and customer service. You don't interpret every delay as disrespect because you understand other people have lives. Family dynamics often remove that normal expectation and replace it with emotional entitlement. Your pause is how you reintroduce normal adult timing. Now let's make it practical with one tiny action you can do today. Choose one family thread, one person or one group chat that reliably spikes your stress. Set a reply window rule for it. Something concrete, not vague. For the next 48 hours, you do not reply to messages from that thread for at least 2 hours, and if a message arrives after 8 p.m., you wait until the next morning. That's measurable. You'll either do it or you won't. And you don't have to announce the rule. You're not asking permission. You're training your nervous system and changing your behavior. If you want an extra layer of protection, use a simple environmental move. Turn off message previews for that thread, or mute it for one day. That is an avoidance. That's choosing when you engage, the same way you choose when you check email. You're treating your attention like it matters. Now we add a slow practice moment, because your body needs repetition, not just insight. Right now, take 3 slow breaths with me. In through your nose, hold for a gentle beat, out through your mouth, longer than the inhale. Again. One more time. As you breathe, imagine the exact moment you usually react. The phone buzzes. The message shows up. You feel that familiar rush. And then imagine something different. You read it once, you don't type, you let your hand stay still, and you say to yourself quietly, "I don't respond from urgency. I respond from choice." Say that sentence once, out loud if you can. And again, a little slower, so your body hears it as a rule. Here's what you're really practicing: tolerating the discomfort of not fixing it immediately. That discomfort is the withdrawal symptom of an old pattern. You're used to soothing yourself by replying, explaining, or defending. When you don't do that, your body protests for a minute. That protest is no danger. It's conditioning. If you can sit through that minute, you win your freedom back in small pieces. And a final truth that will help you stick with this: pausing doesn't mean you'll always respond later. It means you decide later. Sometimes you'll respond. Sometimes you'll set a boundary. Sometimes you'll let it pass. The power is not in the perfect response. The power is in refusing to be rushed into a response that costs you peace. Hold on to this. The pause is the foundation. Because once you stop answering on emotional autopilot, you can start changing what you say and how much you say. And in the next part, we're going to build directly on this with a skill that saves you from endless circular conversations, learning to stop over-explaining, especially when family expects you to defend your adulthood like it's on trial. Section 3. The next shift is uncomfortable for people who grew up being questioned a lot. You stop over-explaining your decisions to family. The instruction is simple, but the stakes are high. When you explain yourself too much, you accidentally invite debate, judgment, and continued involvement in choices that are no longer theirs to manage. If nothing changes here, you stay stuck in conversations that feel endless, circular, and emotionally draining, where every explanation just creates another objection. Over-explaining feels polite and reasonable, but in family dynamics it usually comes from an old survival strategy. At some point earlier in life, explaining how you avoided conflict, earned approval, or proved you were responsible. The problem is that the habit often survives long after it's useful. As an adult, detailed explanations don't bring understanding, they often signal uncertainty. They tell the other person that your decision is still negotiable, still open to input, still something they can weigh in on. This works because of how people interpret information, not because of bad intentions. When you give reasons, timelines, background context, and emotional justifications, the listener naturally looks for gaps. They respond to one detail instead of the decision itself. Your "here's why" becomes their "but what about?" This is how conversations stretch on for weeks instead of ending cleanly. A calmer, more grounded version of you doesn't argue your life into existence. They state it. There's also an internal cost to over-explaining. Every extra sentence pulls you back into the role of a child seeking permission instead of an adult making choices. You may not consciously feel that way, but your body does. Your voice tightens. Your energy drops. You leave the interaction feeling smaller, even if you technically won the argument. As Epictetus reminds us, what's in our control is our own judgment and action, not other people's approval. Over-explaining hands that control away. The microscript you'll use here has to feel slightly uncomfortable, or it won't change anything. Say it exactly like this: "I've thought this through, and this is what I'm doing." If you need a follow-up, use "I'm not looking for advice on this." Both sentences are calm, respectful, and complete. They don't attack. They don't defend. They end the loop. Let's walk through a concrete example. It's a weekend phone call. You mention, casually, that you're considering a job change or a move. A family member immediately starts asking questions. At first they sound curious, then concerned, then critical. The old reaction kicks in. You start explaining your reasons. You talk about long-term goals, finances, timing, and how much thought you've put into it. The more you explain, the more they interrupt with concerns. Before you know it, you're justifying your adulthood to someone who isn't actually deciding anything. Now the new response. You notice yourself starting to explain and you stop mid-sentence. You take a breath. You say, "I've thought this through, and this is what I'm doing." There's a pause on the other end. They might push back. "But have you considered?" You respond, calmly, "I'm not looking for advice on this." Then you let the silence exist. You don't rush to fill it. The conversation either shifts or ends. Either way, you leave it with your energy intact. This is where many people feel guilty. You might think you're being cold, selfish, or disrespectful. But notice what you're actually doing. You're separating respect from compliance. You can respect someone and still decline their involvement. You can listen without agreeing. You can love people without letting them run your decisions. Over-explaining confuses these lines. Saying less clarifies them. Here's a tiny action you can take today. Identify one decision in your life that you've already made but keep explaining to family. Write down one sentence that states it without reasons. Just the decision. Practice saying it out loud a few times so your body gets used to the sound of it. You don't need to send it yet. You're rehearsing a new identity. Now slow this down for a moment. Take a breath in, steady and slow. As you exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Bring to mind a recent conversation where you explained more than you wanted to. Notice the moment where you felt yourself start justifying. Imagine rewinding that moment and replacing your explanation with one clear sentence. Sit with the discomfort that follows. That discomfort is no danger. It's an unfamiliar authority. Something important happens when you stop over-explaining. People may not like it at first. They might accuse you of changing or becoming distant. What's actually happening is that the old dynamic no longer works. And when a dynamic stops working, it often protests. That protest doesn't mean you're wrong. It means the system is adjusting. Over time, conversations get shorter. The emotional charge drops. You stop feeling the need to prepare arguments in advance. And perhaps most importantly, you stop rehearsing your life in your head for an audience that no longer gets a vote. Keep this skill close. It builds directly on the pause you learned earlier. First you slow the response. Then you shorten it. In the next part, we'll go even deeper and talk about how to end conversations internally so they don't keep replaying in your mind long after they're over and draining energy you need elsewhere. Section 4. The next shift is quieter, but it might save you more energy than anything else in this lesson. You learn how to end family conversations internally, even when they end poorly on the outside. The instruction is this: once the interaction is over, you stop carrying it with you. The stakes are real. If you don't learn this, family drama doesn't just take minutes out of your day, it takes hours of mental replay, emotional residue, and stolen attention long after the conversation is finished. Here's what usually happens instead. The call ends, the text thread goes quiet, or the visit wraps up, but your mind keeps going. You replay what they said. You replay what you should have said. You imagine future arguments. You feel anger, guilt, or shame rise again, even though the other person has already moved on. If nothing changes here, family interactions become emotional landmines that ruin entire evenings, weekends, or workdays without anyone even being present. This works because your brain treats unresolved emotional moments as unfinished business. When something feels unfair, threatening, or invalidating, your mind keeps circling it, looking for closure. The problem is that family conversations rarely provide clean closure. Waiting for them to understand, apologize, or change is a losing strategy. The Stoic move is different. As Marcus Aurelius reminds himself, you don't control what others say or think, only how you respond and what you allow to stay with you. Ending the conversation internally is how you reclaim that control. There's also a mistaken belief hiding here, that replaying the conversation is productive. It feels like problem solving, but it's usually self-punishment disguised as preparation. You tell yourself you're thinking it through, but your body feels tense, your mood drops, and nothing actually improves. A calmer, more focused version of you recognizes when thinking has crossed into rumination and chooses to stop feeding it. The microscript for this is not something you say to them. It's something you say to yourself, and it needs to be firm. Use this line exactly: this conversation is over. I don't need to solve it again. If that feels too abrupt at first, you can follow with, I'll decide my next step when I'm calm. These sentences act like a mental door closing. Not slamming the closing. Let's make this concrete. It's Sunday evening. You just got back from a family dinner or ended a long phone call. The interaction wasn't explosive, but it was draining. A comment was made about your choices, your priorities, or your lifestyle. You didn't react, but you didn't feel understood either. Now you're home, trying to relax. Maybe you sit on the couch, maybe you're doing dishes, and maybe you're getting ready for bed. And your mind starts up. You replay the tone. You imagine better comebacks. You feel that familiar tightness in your chest. The old pattern takes over here. You keep thinking, because part of you believes that if you just find the right argument, the discomfort will go away. Instead, the opposite happens. Your body stays activated, You scroll aimlessly. You stay up later than you want. You carry that heaviness into the next day. Here's the new response. You notice the replay starting. Not after 10 minutes, right at the first loop. You say either out loud or silently, this conversation is over. I don't need to solve it again. Then you redirect your attention to something physical and present. You stand up. You stretch. You wash your face. You step outside for air. You're not distracting yourself, you're grounding yourself. And every time the thought comes back, you repeat the line and return to the physical moment. Eventually, the emotional charge fades. Not because the situation was fixed, but because your nervous system stopped reliving it. This is where people misunderstand the goal. Ending a conversation internally doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen or suppressing feelings. It means choosing when and where you process them. You can journal later. You can talk to a trusted friend another day. What you're stopping is the endless, unproductive replay that steals your attention right now. Here's a tiny action you can take today. After your next emotionally charged family interaction, set a timer for 10 minutes. During those 10 minutes, you're allowed to feel whatever comes up: anger, sadness, frustration. When the timer ends, you say your microscript once and intentionally shift activities. Stand up. Change rooms. Change lighting. The rule is simple: feeling is allowed, looping is not. Now let's slow this down together. Take a breath in through your nose, steady and deep. As you exhale, imagine setting down a heavy bag you've been carrying. Again. One more time. Bring to mind a recent family conversation that stuck with you longer than it should have. Notice where you feel it in your body. Then say the sentence with me, slowly: this conversation is over. I don't need to solve it again. Say it once more, with a little more finality. Feel how your body responds to the idea of being done. Something important happens when you practice this consistently. Your mind starts trusting you to handle things later. Right now, your brain replays conversations because it doesn't trust that you'll protect yourself or make decisions consciously. When you end conversations internally and follow through, that trust rebuilds. The replay loses its urgency. You might notice resistance at first. The mind will argue, but this matters. Sometimes it does. The difference is timing. You're not saying it never matters. You're saying it doesn't get to own your entire evening. You're choosing containment over chaos. Over time, family interactions shrink to their actual size. A 10-minute conversation stays 10 minutes. A comment doesn't hijack your mood for hours. You sleep better. You show up more present for the people and work that matters to you. And quietly, without confrontation, you reclaim enormous amounts of mental space. This skill builds directly on the last two. First, you paused instead of reacting. Then, you stopped overexplaining. Now, you stopped carrying the interaction with you. In the next section, we'll take this one step further and look at how family roles pull you back into old versions of yourself, and how simply refusing to step into those roles weakens the entire dynamic without a single argument. Section 5. The next shift is one most adults never consciously make. You stop stepping into the role your family automatically assigns you. The instructions are simple to say and hard to live with at first. When a family treats you like the responsible one, the fixer, the peacemaker, the disappointment, the child who should explain themselves, you don't argue with the role, you just don't perform it. The stakes are high. If you keep stepping into the same role, you keep getting the same reactions, no matter how much you've grown. If nothing changes here, you can do all the right things and still feel stuck. You pause before responding, you say less, you end conversations internally, and yet, one family gathering or one phone call pulls you right back into a familiar emotional posture. You feel smaller. You feel tense. You feel like you're playing a part you thought you outgrew. That's because roles don't dissolve through logic. They dissolve through non-participation. This works because family systems are patterned, not thoughtful. People don't consciously decide to treat you a certain way every time. They respond to cues. Tone. Timing. Energy. If you've always been the one who explains, fixes, absorbs, or reassures, your body has learned how to do that automatically. And their bodies have learned to expect it. When you keep performing the role, the system stays stable. When you stop, the system wobbles. Here's the identity line to anchor this section. A calmer, more grounded version of you doesn't argue with old roles. They simply stop auditioning for them. There's often fear underneath this. You might worry that if you don't play your role, you'll be seen as selfish, cold, or uncaring. But notice the quiet truth. Roles aren't about love. They're about predictability. Families often confuse the two. When you stop being predictable, it can feel threatening to others, not because you're wrong, but because the dynamic no longer runs on autopilot. The microscript here is short and deliberately neutral. You say it when you feel yourself being pulled into a role. Use this sentence exactly: "That's not something I'm taking on." If you need a softer version, you can use, "That's not my role anymore." You're not accusing. You're not defending. You're naming a boundary and stepping out of the part. Let's put this into a real, everyday North American scenario. You're on a family call. Someone brings up a problem, money stress, conflict between relatives, a decision that needs to be made. Eyes and attention suddenly turn toward you. This is familiar. You're the one who usually listens, mediates, explains, or offers solutions. The old reaction shows up instantly. You feel a pull to jump in, to calm things down, and to help everyone feel better. Your chest tightens because you know where this goes. You'll spend the next hour emotionally managing something that isn't actually yours. This time, you pause. You notice the pull. You feel the role trying to snap into place. And instead of stepping forward, you say calmly, "That's not something I'm taking on." There's a beat of silence. Someone might push back. "But you're good at this." Or, "We just need your input." You repeat yourself, without heat, "I hear you, but that's not my role anymore." And then you stop talking. You let the discomfort exist. That moment is where the real work happens. The discomfort is not a sign you did something wrong. It's the system adjusting to a missing piece. When you don't step in, someone else eventually will, or the problem will sit unresolved. Either way, you're no longer the default solution. This can feel unsettling at first, especially if your identity has been tied to being useful or responsible. But notice what changes when you stop. You don't leave the conversation feeling drained. You don't reply it later, wondering if you did enough. You leave with your energy intact. And slowly, the expectation shifts. Here's an important clarification. Refusing a role is not abandoning people. You can still care without carrying. You can still listen without fixing. You can still love without managing outcomes. Roles collapse not through confrontation, but through consistency. Now let's make this practical with a tiny action. Identify one role you automatically play in your family. Not all of them, just one. The fixer. The translator. The emotional sponge. Write down one sentence you'll use the next time that role shows up. Keep it simple. Practice saying it out loud a few times so it doesn't come out shaky when you need it. We also need a slow practice moment here, because this hits deep conditioning. Right now, take a breath in and let your shoulders drop as you exhale. Again. One more time. Bring to mind a recent situation where you stepped into a role without thinking. Notice what you felt responsible for. Now imagine that same moment, but instead of stepping in, you stay seated, silent, grounded. Say the sentence quietly to yourself, "That's not my role anymore." Notice what emotions come up. Anxiety. Guilt. Relief. All of them are allowed. You're not acting yet. You're training. Here's something crucial to understand. When you stop playing a role, people may test you. They may push harder. They may frame it as concern or disappointment. This is not a sign you should go back. It's a sign the old pattern is losing its grip. Systems resist change before they adapt. You're also teaching yourself something important here. Your worth is not tied to how much you absorb, manage, or sacrifice emotionally. You don't have to earn your place by carrying weight that was never yours. When you stop performing, you give yourself permission to be present as who you are now, not who you had to be before. Over time, roles lose their pull. Conversations change. Expectations soften. And even when they don't, you experience them differently. You are no longer acting from obligation. You're choosing your responses. This builds directly on what you've already learned. First, you stopped responding from urgency. Then, you stopped overexplaining. Then, you learned to end conversations internally. Now, you're refusing to step into old identities that keep dragging you backward. In the next section, we'll talk about how to handle guilt when it inevitably shows up, and how to tell the difference between healthy discomfort and emotional manipulation without turning yourself into the villain. Section 6. The next shift is the one that usually makes people backslide if they don't understand it clearly. You learn how to sit with guilt without obeying it. The instruction is not to eliminate guilt, argue with it, or prove it wrong. The instruction is to let guilt be present without letting it decide your behavior. The stakes are high. If guilt keeps running the show, every boundary you set eventually collapses, and you find yourself back in the same patterns, wondering why nothing sticks. If nothing changes here, guilt becomes the invisible leash. You pause before responding, you say less, and you step out of old roles, and then guilt shows up and pulls you right back in. You start questioning yourself. Am I being selfish? Am I hurting them? Am I becoming someone I don't like? And to make that uncomfortable feeling go away, you explain again, re-engage, or undo the boundary you just set. The cycle resets, and the lesson quietly erases itself. This works because guilt is not a moral compass. It's a social emotion. It evolved to keep you connected to groups, not to help you build an aligned adult life. In families, guilt often lingers long after it's useful, especially when roles and expectations haven't been updated. Your body feels guilt not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something new. A calmer, more grounded version of you understands this distinction and doesn't confuse discomfort with danger. There's an important identity shift here. You are allowed to disappoint people without being a disappointment. Those two things feel identical in the body at first, but they are not the same. When you make decisions that prioritize your values, someone else may feel unhappy. That emotional response belongs to them. When you treat their discomfort as an emergency you must fix, you turn guilt into a command. When you let it exist without action, guilt loses its authority. The microscript for this moment is internal, not something you announce. Use this sentence exactly: guilt is allowed. It doesn't get to decide. If you need a second line, add, I can care without complying. These sentences are not meant to erase the feeling. They're meant to change your relationship to it. Let's ground this in a realistic situation. You've just set a boundary with a family member. Maybe you delayed a response. Maybe you declined advice. Maybe you stepped out of a role you've always played. The conversation ends, and on the surface, everything is calm. But later that day, or the next morning, you feel it. A heaviness in your chest. A low-grade anxiety. Thoughts start creeping in. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should explain more. Maybe I should just do what they want so things feel normal again. The old reaction is familiar. You reach out. You soften your boundaries. You add explanations. You try to smooth things over. And for a moment, the guilt eases. But notice what else happens. Your boundary weakens. The dynamic resets. And somewhere inside, you feel a quiet resentment toward yourself for folding again. Here's the new response. You notice the guilt without rushing to fix it. You name it silently. This is guilt, not truth. You say in your microscript, guilt is allowed. It doesn't get to decide. Then you wait. You don't take corrective action. You don't send a follow-up message. You let the sensation rise and fall like a wave. And something important happens. The feeling peaks, then fades. Not instantly, but predictably. Your nervous system learns that guilt is survivable. This is where people often misunderstand healthy relationships. You might think that if someone feels guilty, it means they did something wrong. In reality, guilt often shows up at the edge of growth. When you change how you relate, the old emotional alarms go off. They're not warnings. They're residue. There's also a key distinction to make here. Healthy guilt points you toward repair when you've violated your values. Unhealthy guilt pressures you to abandon your values to keep someone else comfortable. The first leads to integrity. The second leads to self-betrayal. Sitting with guilt long enough allows you to tell the difference. Now let's make this practical with a tiny action. The next time you feel guilt after setting or holding a boundary, set a 24-hour rule. You do not send any follow-up messages, explanations, or apologies for one full day. During that window, you are allowed to feel everything. You're just not allowed to act on guilt. At the end of 24 hours, you reassess. Most of the time, the urge to fix things has already passed. We also need to bring the body into this, because guilt lives in sensation, not logic. Right now, take a slow breath in through your nose. As you exhale, relax your jaw and your shoulders. Again. One more time. Bring to mind a recent moment where guilt pushed you to undo a boundary. Notice where you feel it in your body. Tight chest. Heavy stomach. Restless energy. Now say the sentence quietly, guilt is allowed. It doesn't get to decide. Say it again, slower, so your body hears it as permission, not resistance. Another important reframe will help you here. Guilt often feels urgent, but urgency is not accuracy. The pressure to act quickly is part of how guilt maintains control. When you slow down, guilt loses its sharp edge and becomes information instead of instruction. You may also notice something surprising over time. When you stop obeying guilt, it shows up less often. Not because you've become uncaring, but because your nervous system learns that boundaries are normal, not emergencies. Family members may still express disappointment, but your body doesn't interpret it as a threat to your belonging. This is also where many people fear becoming the bad one. But notice what actually changes. You're not yelling. You're not cutting people off. You're not retaliating. You're simply not sacrificing yourself to regulate other people's emotions. That's not cruelty. That's adulthood. As Seneca suggests in his letters, much of our suffering comes from taking on burdens that were never ours to carry. Guilt is often one of those burdens. When you put it down, you don't become less loving. You become more honest. This skill connects everything you've learned so far. You pause instead of reacting. You stop over-explaining. You end conversations internally. You refuse old roles. And now, when guilt tries to pull you back, you let it pass without obedience. That's how patterns actually change. In the next section, we'll focus on something very practical and often overlooked: how to set clear, calm boundaries that don't invite negotiation, and how small wording shifts prevent arguments before they even start. Section 7. The next shift is where everything you've practiced becomes visible on the outside. You learn how to state boundaries clearly and briefly, without turning them into negotiations. The instruction is straightforward. When you decide on a boundary, you state it once, calmly, and you don't defend it. The stakes are real. If your boundaries sound like requests, explanations, or emotional appeals, they will be treated like invitations for debate. And if nothing changes here, you'll keep feeling confused about why people keep pushing after you thought you were clear. Most boundary problems aren't caused by weak will. They're caused by unclear delivery. Many adults believe they've set a boundary when they've actually expressed a preference wrapped in justification. They say things like, "I'm really busy right now," and I've been under a lot of stress lately, so I might not be able to do this, but maybe later. What the other person hears is uncertainty. Uncertainty invites follow-up. Follow-up turns into pressure. Pressure triggers old reactions, and the cycle starts again. This works because people respond more to structure than emotion. When a boundary is clear and short, there's nothing to grab onto. When it's padded with reasons, the listener naturally responds to the reasons instead of the limit. A calmer, more grounded version of you understands that clarity is kinder than overexplanation. It ends confusion early instead of stretching it out. There's also an internal shift happening. When you state boundaries cleanly, you stop asking for permission to have limits. You're no longer trying to convince someone that your boundary is reasonable. You're simply informing them of how you're going to operate. That distinction changes everything. As Epictetus reminds us, our responsibility is to govern our own actions, not to manage other people's reactions. Clear boundaries honor that division. The microscript here is practical and repeatable. Use this sentence exactly, I'm not available for that. If you need to specify timing, add one clause, not a paragraph, I'm not available for that this week. Or, I'm not available for that anymore. That's it. No apology required. No backstory attached. Just a clear statement of availability. Let's walk through a realistic scenario. You're talking with a family member who regularly expects your time or involvement. Maybe they want you to attend something last minute. Maybe they want emotional support during a recurring issue. Maybe they want you to step into a role you've already decided to leave behind. The old reaction is immediate. You feel the urge to soften the no. You start explaining your schedule. You mention how bad you feel. You offer alternatives you don't actually want to give. And by the end of the conversation, you've agreed to something that quietly drains you. Now the new response. They make the request. You pause. You check in with yourself and realize the answer is no. You say, calmly, I'm not available for that. There's silence. They might push. Why not? You repeat the boundary, unchanged, I'm not available. You don't raise your voice. You don't justify. You let the discomfort exist. Eventually, the conversation either moves on or ends. Either way, you leave with your energy intact. This moment often feels harder than it needs to be because of what your mind adds to it. You might think you're being harsh. You might worry you're damaging the relationship. But notice what actually damages relationships over time. Resentment. Burnout. Silent scorekeeping. Clean boundaries prevent those outcomes. They don't cause them. Here's an important clarification. A boundary doesn't require the other person's agreement to be valid. It only requires your consistency. When you repeat the same calm line instead of offering new explanations, you teach people how to interact with you. Not through force, but through predictability. Now let's turn this into a tiny action. Choose one boundary you've been dancing around with family. Something you've hinted at but haven't clearly stated. Write one sentence that expresses it without reasons. Practice saying it out loud until it sounds steady, not defensive. You don't need to send it yet. You're training your delivery. We also need a slow practice moment here, because this is where many people feel physical anxiety. Right now, take a slow breath in through your nose. As you exhale, drop your shoulders and unclench your jaw. Again. One more time. Now imagine yourself stating a boundary clearly. Notice the urge to add explanations. Let that urge pass. Say the sentence silently once, I'm not available for that. Notice how your body reacts. The tension you feel is no danger. It's an unfamiliar clarity. Something subtle but powerful happens when you stop negotiating your boundaries. People who rely on your flexibility may feel frustrated. They might accuse you of changing. What they're really reacting to is the loss of access they used to have. That reaction is information, not a command. You don't need to correct it. Over time, conversations become simpler. Requests become more thoughtful. And even when they don't, your internal experience changes. You're no longer bracing for impact. You're stating facts and letting others adjust. It's also worth noting that clear boundaries make it easier for others to respect you, even if they don't like the limit. Ambiguity breeds tension. Clarity resolves it. You're not being rigid. You're being readable. This section ties together everything you've practiced so far. You pause instead of reacting. You don't overexplain. You end conversations internally. You refuse old roles. You sit with guilt without obeying it. Now, you speak boundaries in a way that doesn't reopen the door you just closed. In the next section, we'll take these skills into one of the most emotionally charged environments of all, shared family time, holidays, and group settings, where multiple triggers stack at once and the pressure to fall back into old patterns is strongest. Section 8. The next shift is about pressure, not conversation. You learn how to protect yourself in shared family spaces where multiple triggers stack at once. Holidays, group chats, birthdays, reunions, long weekends, these environments are where old patterns come back strongest. The instruction here is not to manage every interaction, but to predecide how much access people get to you. The stakes are high. If you don't plan for these situations, you don't just risk one uncomfortable exchange, you risk being pulled back into a full version of yourself you've already outgrown. If nothing changes here, shared family time becomes emotionally expensive. You walk into it hopeful and walk out depleted. Group chats pull you into side conversations you didn't want. One comment derails your mood for hours. You feel like you have to stay on the entire time, monitoring yourself, monitoring others, trying not to trigger anything. By the end, you're exhausted, not from the event itself, but from the constant self-regulation. This works because environments matter as much as words. When you're surrounded by familiar people, sounds, jokes, and routines, your nervous system reads it as a return to old territory. Even if you've changed internally, the setting itself cues old behaviors. That's why skills that work one-on-one can collapse in group settings unless you add structure ahead of time. A calmer, more grounded version of you doesn't rely on willpower in these moments. They rely on predecisions. There's an identity shift here worth naming. You are not required to be fully available just because you're physically present. Presence and access are not the same thing. You can attend without engaging deeply. You can listen without responding. You can stay kind without staying exposed. This distinction is what keeps shared time from becoming overwhelming. The microscript for this section is designed for group pressure. Use this sentence exactly when conversations start drifting into territory you don't want to enter. I'm going to sit this one out. If needed, you can add, but I hope you all enjoy. It's neutral, brief, and doesn't challenge anyone. It simply removes you from the exchange. Let's put this into a realistic North American scenario. It's a holiday gathering. People are sitting around the table or spread across the living room. Conversations overlap. Someone brings up a topic that reliably hooks you, your career, your relationship status, your plans, your past choices. In a group, the pressure feels stronger. If you respond, everyone listens. If you don't, it feels awkward. The old reaction kicks in. You feel the urge to explain, joke, or defend yourself so the moment passes quickly. In the past, you'd jump in. You'd answer lightly, then more seriously. Someone would challenge you. Another person would add their opinion. Before you know it, you're the focus, managing reactions from multiple angles. You smile, but inside you feel exposed and tense. Even after the conversation moves on, your body stays activated. Now the new response. You feel the hook, and instead of stepping forward, you lean back, literally or internally. You smile lightly and say, I'm going to sit this one out. You don't add reasons. You don't justify. You shift your attention to your food, your drink, or another neutral conversation. The group might pause for a second. Then someone else fills the space. The moment passes. And you remain intact. This isn't avoidance. It's selective engagement. You're choosing where your energy goes in an environment designed to pull it in multiple directions. Group chats work the same way. A message comes in. Then another. Then a joke, a comment, an opinion that touches an old nerve. The old pattern is to jump in quickly so you're not misunderstood or left out. The new pattern is restraint. You read. You don't respond. Or you use the microscript, I'm going to sit this one out. Then you mute the thread for a few hours. Nothing terrible happens. The conversation continues without you. Your nervous system stays calm. Here's where many people feel internal conflict. You might think, if I don't engage, I'm being distant. Or, I'm letting things be said that I disagree with. But notice what you're actually protecting. You're protecting your focus and your emotional baseline. You're choosing not to fight battles that don't move your life forward. Now let's make this concrete with a tiny action. Before your next family gathering or high-traffic group chat, decide 2 things in advance. First, how long you'll stay fully engaged. Maybe it's 1 hour. Maybe it's the first half of the event. Second, identify one topic you will not discuss. Just one. Write it down privately. That predecision removes the need to choose under pressure. We also need a slow practice moment here, because group settings activate the body strongly. Right now, take a breath in through your nose. As you exhale, imagine a subtle boundary forming around you, not a wall, just a filter. Again. One more time. Picture yourself in a group setting, hearing a comment that would normally hook you. Instead of leaning forward, you stay grounded. Say the sentence silently, I'm allowed to sit this out. Feel how your body responds to the idea of not participating. Something important happens when you practice this consistently. The emotional intensity of group settings drops. You stop scanning the room for threats. You stop rehearsing answers in advance. You become more present, not less, because you're not constantly bracing. And paradoxically, people often respond to you with more respect, not because you argued better, but because you didn't scramble. It's also worth naming a subtle trap. Sometimes people use humor or teasing in groups to pull you back into a role. It feels lighter than criticism, but the effect is the same. You don't need a different response. The same principle applies. You smile, you disengage, you redirect. You don't need to win the moment. You just need to exit it cleanly. Over time, shared family time changes shape. You engage where it feels genuine. You disengage where it doesn't. You stop leaving events emotionally depleted. And when you do feel discomfort, it passes faster because you're no longer amplifying it through forced participation. This section ties together everything before it. You pause instead of reacting. You don't overexplain. You end conversations internally. You refuse old roles. You sit with guilt. You state boundaries clearly. Now, you apply all of that in environments where pressure is highest, without making a scene and without disappearing. Hold on to this skill, because it sets the stage for what comes next. In the next part, we're going to walk through a single, realistic situation where multiple family pressures collide at once, and you'll see how these tools work together in real time to protect your evening, your focus, and your sense of self. Section 9. It's Friday night. You've just finished a long week, and you're finally home. Shoes off, phone on the counter, something simple heating up in the kitchen. Your plan is modest and important, a quiet evening, an early night, a reset. You haven't even sat down yet when your phone lights up with a family group chat notification. Then another. Then a third. Your body reacts before you read a word. You glance at the screen. A comment about your plans for the holidays. A follow-up about a decision you made months ago. A joke that lands a little too close to an old role you've been trying to leave behind. Nothing explosive. Nothing you could point to and say, that's unacceptable. And yet your chest tightens, your shoulders rise, and you feel that familiar pull to jump in and manage it before it turns into something worse. This is the exact kind of moment that used to ruin your night. The old pattern starts lining itself up automatically. You feel the urge to respond quickly so you don't seem distant. You start drafting explanations in your head. You imagine how the conversation could go sideways if you don't say the right thing. You're not even sitting down yet, and your nervous system is already back in family mode. This time, something interrupts it. You notice the rush. Not the messages, the rush. You feel the urgency in your body and remember the first tool. You don't respond immediately. You set the phone down and take a breath. In through your nose, slow. Out through your mouth, longer. The urge to reply spikes for a moment, then eases just enough for you to choose. A few minutes later, you pick up the phone and read the messages more carefully. The urgency you felt before isn't actually in the words. It was in you. That realization alone changes the temperature of the moment. One message is clearly inviting commentary about your life choice. In the past, you would have explained everything. Tonight, you don't. You type one sentence, "I've thought this through, and this is what I'm doing." You don't add reasons. You don't soften it. You hit send and put the phone face down. Almost immediately, guilt tries to enter. A familiar heaviness in your chest. A thought, was that too blunt? Should I add more context so they don't feel shut out? You recognize it for what it is. Not truth. Guilt. You say to yourself quietly, guilt is allowed. It doesn't get to decide. You don't take corrective action. You let the feeling be there while you finish making your food. The group chat continues without you for a bit. A few opinions bounce around. Someone tags you directly. You feel the old role trying to snap into place, the one where you clarify, smooth things over, keep everyone comfortable. You pause again. You remember you're not required to be fully available just because you're present. You type, "I'm going to sit this one out," and that's it. No explanation. No follow-up. You mute the thread for the rest of the evening. There's a moment of discomfort. Silence. Your body waits for something bad to happen. Nothing does. You sit down to eat. The tension in your shoulders starts to drop. You realize this is the point where, in the past, the evening would have been lost. You would have kept checking your phone. You would have replayed messages in your head. You would have felt irritated at everyone and at yourself. Tonight, instead, you're actually present. Later, as you're cleaning up, one last message comes through from a family member privately. It's framed as concern. It lightly presses on the same boundary again. You feel the familiar tug to explain. You catch it. You type one calm sentence, "I'm not available for that." You don't wait for a response. You turn the phone over. There's a final wave of guilt, smaller this time. You take a breath. In and out. You remind yourself, this conversation is over. I don't need to solve it again. And you mean it. You change rooms. You lower the lights. You put on something neutral and familiar. The replay tries to start once, then fades. Your nervous system settles. Your evening stays yours. When you go to bed, you notice something subtle but important. You're not carrying resentment. You're not rehearsing arguments. You're not proud in a loud way, but there's a quiet steadiness in your body. You didn't win anything. You didn't fix anyone. You simply didn't abandon yourself. That's the turning point most people miss. The win isn't that family suddenly understands you. The win is that their lack of understanding no longer hijacks your night. You responded instead of reacted. You paused. You said less. You refused an old role. You sat with guilt without obeying it. You stated boundaries without negotiating. And because of that, a normal Friday night stayed normal. You fall asleep faster than usual. Not because everything is resolved, but because nothing is chasing you. The tools didn't make the situation perfect. They made it contained. And containment is what gives you your life back, one evening at a time. Section 10. What this episode was really about is the difference between reacting and responding when family pressure shows up. Reacting is fast, automatic, and familiar. Responding is slower, chosen, and grounded. The goal was never to change your family or finally make them understand you. The goal was to stop handing over your emotional control the moment old dynamics appear, so you can live your adult life without feeling pulled apart from the inside. First, we started by naming the real problem. Family opinions feel heavier because they activate old roles and conditioned responses, not because you're incapable of handling them. Then you learned how to interrupt that process by refusing to respond immediately, so urgency stopped making decisions for you. Next, we addressed overexplaining, and how saying too much quietly invites debate and keeps you stuck defending choices you've already made. After that, you learned how to end conversations internally, so they don't keep replaying in your mind and draining the rest of your day. Then we looked at family roles, and how simply refusing to step into them weakens the entire dynamic without confrontation. From there, we talked about guilt, and how to let it exist without obeying it, so boundaries don't collapse the moment discomfort shows up. After that, you learned how to state boundaries clearly and briefly, without turning them into negotiations. Finally, you saw how all of these tools work together in shared family spaces, where pressure is highest and old patterns are most tempting. Then we walked through that Friday night moment, where everything used to spiral. You saw how pausing, saying less, sitting out, and ending the interaction internally kept the evening intact. Nothing magical happened. No one transformed. What changed was your internal experience. You stayed regulated. You stayed present. You stayed yourself. This is what choosing your own life actually looks like in practice. Not dramatic cutoffs. Not endless explanations. Not emotional shutdown. It looks like small, steady decisions that protect your attention and energy. It looks like tolerating short-term discomfort so you don't live in long-term resentment. It looks like respecting your family without letting them run your nervous system. Now let's make this concrete with 3 things you can do today. First, pick one family message or conversation that usually triggers urgency and decide on a reply window. For the next 24 hours, you don't respond immediately. You wait at least 2 hours, or until the next day, before replying. Second, identify one decision in your life that you keep explaining. Write one sentence that states it without reasons, and practice saying it out loud once or twice so your body gets used to hearing it. Third, choose one shared space or group chat where you'll reduce engagement. Mute it for a day, or decide in advance one topic you'll sit out of and follow through without announcing it. If this lesson resonated, the next one you'll want to watch is about emotional detachment without withdrawal, how to care about people without carrying their emotions or opinions as your own. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships, this is what we do here every week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.